Hey guys, welcome back. So now we're jumping back into Peter David's 2023 Joe Fixit series. And once again with this one, Peter David's doing a phenomenal job at going back and adding a little bit extra to his stories. So with that said, let's get into it. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so when we jump back in, we pick up from Joe Fixit's violent rampage, where at this point he's under the Kingpin's influence, and now Joe's going after Michael Getty and Spider-Man. But in this moment when Joe's finally got his hands on Spider-Man and slammed him into the ground, we find that this sends Peter into a flashback. And when this happens, I can't help but to think of how while Peter's having this flashback, his focus should be in the present. But also anytime that we see this in a story, either in comics or in films, I like to think that the person who's having the flashback, like in this case with Peter, in that split second, they're really just remembering the most notable part of this memory. And for us as the reader or the viewer, we're given the full context so that we understand what came to mind for that person in that moment, rather than thinking Peter's just laying on the ground in the middle of a fight having a 5-6 minute nap. But nonetheless, in this flashback, we see Peter make his way to a diner. And when he does, he's waiting for someone. But as he walks in, he sits at the counter and he sees Bruce. So he starts a conversation with him by saying that he assumes that his coffee is decaf because that's probably the type of coffee that Bruce would get so that he wouldn't get too jittery. But initially, Bruce doesn't know who he's talking to or what Peter's talking about, to where then Peter's like, "You're Bruce Banner, you're the Incredible Hulk." So then right away, Bruce is more or less like, "I'm not looking for trouble." And Peter's like, "Neither am I." And he goes on to tell Bruce that he's just waiting for, and Bruce is like, "Crusher Creel?" And Peter's like, "Yeah, wait, how'd you know?" To where then he turns around and he sees Crusher Creel just walking right in. But as it turns out, Peter had came here because the night before, Crusher Creel was at the bar, boasting about how he was going to hit the bank across the street the next day. But for Peter, he didn't know that Crusher Creel was going to come here first. So now this morning is going very differently than everyone here had planned. But at this point, Peter introduces himself as Spider-Man to Crusher Creel, and he lets him know that he was waiting here for Creel to make his move on the bank. But with seeing this, Crusher Creel is more or less like, "I know you didn't think you were going to stop me by yourself." And Peter's kind of like, "Yo, well that was plan A," but at this point he's got a plan B, as he points behind Creel, and then we see two hulked out hands grabbing the ball from his ball and chain, to where then we see the Hulk telling Creel to either walk away or get smashed. And with hearing this, it's very quickly where we can tell that Creel, he really doesn't want any trouble, because right away he asks the Hulk to let go, and he even says please. So Hulk lets go and Creel walks right out. But then next, Peter orders a ton of pancakes and a whole lot of bacon so that the Hulk can get something to eat. But then it's here when they have a conversation, and it seems to be one of the biggest takeaways for Peter when he thinks back to this moment, because initially he tells Hulk that he's surprised that he can talk, and it's not even so much of the case to where Peter's surprised that the Hulk can talk at all, but he's just used to the Hulk saying Hulk smash and that's about it. But it's here where the Hulk tells him that he's always talking, and he's not about to go around just going Hulk smash for no reason. But on the contrary, it's Hulk's enemies who do things for no reason. They attack Hulk for no reason, they send tanks for no reason, they won't leave Hulk alone for no reason. But it was in this moment when the Hulk explained to Peter that these things make him angry, and these are the reasons why Hulk smashes. And I mean, of course, we know that there's a lot more to it. This is like the simplified version. But for the Savage Hulk, this really explains a majority of the instances where he had been either provoked or attacked, and in response, Hulk will respond the one and only way that he knows. And be that as it may, right or wrong, Hulk doesn't do it for no reason. But then it's here where the pancakes and the bacon show up, and Hulk digs in. But shortly after, we come to find out that this ain't the only kind of bacon that showed up, because as the Hulk is enjoying his breakfast, the diner is shot up and the SWAT team just comes rushing in. And in the Hulk's defense, Peter's trying to tell these guys that the Hulk didn't do anything wrong, he's just enjoying his breakfast. But also in this moment, we find precisely what the Hulk was talking about, with him telling Peter that he doesn't smash things for no reason. People bother him for no reason, and Hulk just takes it from there. But with Hulk going outside and letting the SWAT team know that he swats back, a vehicle comes flying into the diner, so of course Peter's spider sense goes off and he jumps out of the way. But then it's here for Peter as he's laying on the ground, asking why, where we find that he snaps out of the flashback and back into the present moment, which again for Peter feels more like a split second, though for us we were taken through the moment closer to real time. But nonetheless, with Peter taking this split second to more or less lay there, and it isn't long before he realizes that he's about to get stomped. So of course Peter rolls out of the way just before he gets smashed, because really had that stomp connected, Peter might not be the Spider-Man we know him as today. But with Joe Fixit being out of control, or really more so under the influence of the Kingpin's mind control, it's here where we find that Peter tries to reason with Banner, who he knows is inside of there somewhere. And really, I would say with this happening in most situations, and especially in situations early on, it wouldn't be a good idea to try to talk to Banner while you're dealing with the Hulk. And you would think if any time, this would definitely be one of those times not to do it. Because if you guys remember earlier on at the beginning of this playlist, when I talked about the origin of Joe Fixit, at the time I talked about the events leading up to the Hulk making his way to Vegas, meeting Michael Getty, and seeing this as an opportunity to create a new identity and take care of things without Bruce messing them up. But also for Joe Fixit around this time, he had also been struggling with Bruce trying to come back, which is something that we were also shown in Incredible Hulk issue 348. Because at this point in time for Joe, during a story called Job Security, he had seen Bruce as a threat, and mainly for two reasons. Because for one, if Bruce Banner were to come back at this point, then he would cause Joe to leave, which for Joe, that would mean the end of the Hulk being treated the best that he's ever been treated. And at the time when Joe was struggling with this, he'd have moments where it felt like Bruce was clawing at his mind, and we would see Joe struggle with Bruce trying to come back, as well as the return of the threat of the Hulk turning back into Bruce because of sunlight. But then also the second reason why Bruce was such a huge threat, this had came to Joe's attention when Crusher Krill had paid the Coliseum Casino a visit. And at the time for Joe, it wasn't so much the reason that he was worried about Crusher Krill. No, definitely not that. But instead at the time, it was more of the case of Joe being afraid of Banner getting the best of him and causing Joe to revert back to Banner in the middle of a fight with Crusher Krill, because that right there would just be a death sentence. But I say this just as a bit of a reminder of the dynamic between Bruce and Joe at the time. But at this point, with Peter trying to reason with Bruce, with him just bypassing Joe and calling out to Bruce, telling him to pull himself together, which again is something I would say is risky. But with Peter doing this, right away we see Joe and Bruce going back and forth until finally we see Bruce saying, "Hulk, what are you doing? Where are you? Why are you destroying everything?" And from here, right away we're taken into Bruce's mindscape, where at this point he's just going off on Joe. And he's like, "Why are you wearing a suit? Who is this identity you've created?" Because really this is Peter David showing us the first time that Joe Fixit stopped resisting and he just confronted Banner. And with how this is done is pretty wild, because Joe tells Bruce that this, you know, the whole suit, the whole Joe Fixit getup, it's better than anything that Bruce had ever done for him. To where then Joe tells Bruce to get out of his head. And it's crazy because of course this is Bruce's mindscape. And Bruce makes it obvious that he sees Joe as the intruder. And he lets Joe know, "I never wanted you in my mind, never wanted you in my life. You're the intruder, why don't you get out?" And right then a huge rock just slams between the two of them, which in a way just shows us how much more in control Joe is in this moment as opposed to Bruce. But then it's here where Joe just schools Banner just a little bit, because he gets up and he tells Bruce like, "You really don't know anything, do you?" And he asks Bruce like, "Do you think that I was created by a gamma bomb? Because if that was the case, why doesn't She-Hulk have a monstrous side? Or the leader for that matter?" And it's here where he leans in and tells Bruce, "I was always inside you, Banner. Always. I'm how you survived adulthood, how you coped with your father. Your personality splintered decades before I showed up. So how about you say thank you?" And really with Joe Fixit saying this, for anyone who needs a bit of a better understanding of what Joe's referring to as far as the different Hulks existing way before the Gamma explosion, this is something that was shown and explained to us very well in Al Ewing's Immortal Hulk series. And I got a link down below where we dive way deeper into it, because at the time we were shown a number of the specific instances where Bruce's mind splintered at a young age and created these Hulks decades before they would physically manifest. But with Joe explaining this to Bruce and telling him that if anything, Bruce owes him a thank you, and it's here with hearing this when Bruce spits in Joe's face. And then from there, Bruce is just like, "Go ahead, kill me. You know you always wanted to. End this miserable life of mine." And right away, Joe just twists Bruce's top like, "Who the f you thought you was talking to?" To where then Joe takes a huge leap, jumping straight out of the Coliseum Casino. While in the meantime for Peter, since he obviously didn't see what was going on in Joe's head, For him, it's here where he then goes on to investigate by using the spider tracer that he had placed on Wilson Fisk back in issue 1. And it's here where we then jump back over to Fisk when we find that he's went back to see the scientist who he had used to create this neurotoxin. And at this point, Fisk had come to ask how long it's going to work. But with him asking, the scientist, he just doesn't know, because it depends on the subject and the strength of the personality involved. And depending on the individual, it could last for an hour, it could last for a day, or that person could shake off the neurotoxin in 20 minutes. So the Kingpin tells this guy that he can't proceed unless he can count on the long-term effects of this powder. So in response, the scientist is like, I'll update the potency of the formula, and Fisk just tells him, see to it that you do. Which is really like Fisk letting this guy know that if he doesn't, that there's gonna be consequences and repercussions. But after this, as Fisk leaves, the scientist gets back to work, and it's here where we find that Peter had been there the whole time. But also with how this is done, it's kind of funny. Because for one, we get the old school spider symbol light, and I can't quite remember the name of it. One of you guys help me out in the comments. But also with Peter showing up here, he quickly goes into the tough guy interrogation mode. And it's funny because he really doesn't need to, because right away, this scientist, he's just telling him everything. And when Spider-Man asks, how is Fisk controlling Joe Fixit? Right away, the scientist is like, it's the cane, it's the powder inside the cane. And he tells him everything. He lets him know that it doesn't work on people who are wearing a mask, which is why the Kingpin didn't use it on Spider-Man. But then when Spider-Man goes on to ask him if there's a cure, the scientist is then like, no, because Wilson Fisk had never asked him to produce one. And really, this is the part for me where I'm just like, dude, if you're a scientist working for a bad guy who's being forced to work for a bad guy, you just make a cure, man. You don't just give them whatever they want without setting up a back door. Like, could you imagine if the first Death Star didn't have a weak spot? Like, you're supposed to design a thermal exhaust port somewhere in this plan. But anyway, at this point, we step away from Peter's interrogation, and it's here where we head back over to Joe, inside of Bruce's mindscape, where he's just kind of been sitting there, looking at Bruce, laying there, and eventually Joe's like, you know what? Fine, wake up. You take the wheel. So Bruce does. But when he wakes up, come to find out, Bruce is falling from thousands of feet because Joe didn't bother to give Bruce back control while he was just standing on the ground. He did it when he was in the air, because that's how you treat people that you don't like. And I mean the ones that live in your mind, not actual people. What's wrong with you? What you think this is? And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/Dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.